Okay, now we are recording. Welcome to Planet Venus. My name is Dr. Venus Evans Winters, also known as Dr. V. I am the CEO and founder of Planet Venus. And these are my co-hosts, Miss Raven Preston and Anaya Francis. And today is our guest, Dr. Angela Clack. Okay, so welcome to Planet Venus, and I will tell you all, as most people already know, we are a very laid back community collective, and we are here today to be in dialogue about Black girls and Black women's health across the diaspora, but certainly an intergenerational conversation. So I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Clack.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So Dr. Clack, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? But I have to tell you this. So one of our co-hosts, Miss Raven Preston, who's a graduate student, she's really impressed with your ideas, how you think, and things like that. So could you tell us a little bit more? So we are too ecstatic. We are happy to have you.
Oh my gosh, I'm very humbled. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Raven. Thank you. I'm so humbled. So I am, Dr. Angela Clack. I am currently in Southern New Jersey. So I'm like 2 hours from New York, because people think I'm close to New York. And I'm only 20 minutes outside Philly. So I'm sort of treating Philly and Southern New Jersey as my area when I'm looking at
Now,
the
did
folks
you
that
know that I have
for.
family from Jersey? Did you know that? Did I ever tell
What
you?
part?
Newark and Patterson. My
Yeah.
parents. Yeah.
That's
my mother.
about 2 hours from me. I know where that is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Pretty, those are nice areas though. I did not know that, so that's good that I know that. Now I know you know Jersey, so.
A little bit.
Yeah, so currently practicing. Now I'm in private practice. I've been in private practice for the last 12 years about, but I've worked in so many other places. Like my journey started a long time ago. I've been doing mental health for like 25 years. And so when I graduated from my undergraduate, so I'm born and raised in West Virginia. You might not hear the accent, but you might pick up on a couple words now here and there. But that is where I was born and raised. I went to WVU, and then I decided to get my master's where I went to Towson. So I ended up in Maryland for 10 years. So I got my master's degree, and then I worked there. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to get my doctorate degree. So I stopped. Actually, I got a terminal master's. And I just started working, and I worked with residential youth and a couple other opportunities. And it was just one clinical supervisor I had, and she said, she says, you're good, but you could be great. And the way that you do that, you have to go back to school. And so that started my next 5-year journey into my doctoral program.
Wow.
And from there, I did my internship in Philly, and that's what got me to Philly. So I've kind of migrated up the East Coast, and so I've had a variety of experiences. So that's kind of where I am now.
Yeah, and your area is psychology, right? A
Correct.
doctorate in psychology. And do you specialize in any specific area?
So you're right. I have a PsyD as opposed to a PhD, which is interesting. I chose not to go to PhD route because I didn't want to do research. And then I got my PsyD and ended up doing research for my dissertation anyway, because that's the way the chair wanted it. So I ended up doing what I exactly tried to avoid, because I hate statistics, but I ended up doing it anyway, to kind of the integrity of my dissertation needed it. And so I have called myself in the last 6 months an evolving psychotherapist, psychologist. I have just changed so much from when I started practicing to who I am now. The population hasn't changed much, because there's always been communities of color, always. Even when I worked with very young kids, all the way up to now, I've always been in kind of urban communities. And so now, though, I'm working with more adult women, and they're mostly brown and Black women. And I'm seeing a lot of, if you can imagine, because of COVID. Before that, though, I've been seeing a lot of women with depression, what depression looks like for women of color, and anxiety now, and self-esteem and self-worth is a big one that I'm doing a lot of work around too.
Well, that leads me to my question. What kind of symptoms are Black women in particular presenting with, especially during the pandemic?
That's a great question, because in 2016, I hired a coach because I was working in juvenile correction. So these are kids from 13 to 23, 24. And we call them juvenile corrections, but it's incarceration for young boys.
That's interesting.
And,
another fun fact, Dr. Angela,
now,
see, we have a lot in common. So
oh, okay.
I actually started, this going to impress because I got a future lawyer down there, Naya. But I started out my practice just getting practice working with repeat offenders, youth offenders.
Wow.
Yeah. So
oh my God, that was the best job for me. I was there for 8 years. I loved it.
Wow.
I was there for 8 years, and I just got used to a lot of the things that you had to get used to in working in jail settings.
Yeah.
You know, like
the
no makeup,
stories.
no jewelry. Yeah, all of that. You just, strip down and all that. I just got used to that. So much so when I would go to the airport and you had to do this, it's like I just knew what to do. And they were like, how do you? And I said, look, I do this every day for work. So
See, I was at the courthouse. I didn't have to do that. I was just at the courthouse. You know me, I don't really have a great relationship with police. So I walked through the metal detector with an attitude anyway.
Then
the kids would come in, and I just appreciated their stories. I think if people heard the stories of the kids who get involved with the juvenile justice system, they will understand that these kids' lives weren't easy to begin with. We're criminalizing, like not just youthful behavior, but kids who are basically in survival mode. We criminalize it. Yeah.
Yes. That's what I said. When I interviewed for the job and they were asking me like, do you think you fit for this job or something like that? And I said, the kids that you treat are the same kids I'm seeing now. There's a pipeline from residential and foster care into the criminal system. I said, so there are kids who've been traumatized and hurt, like all kinds of, and then there's no intervention. And I said, so there's a pipeline. So I'm seeing, I get them before you get them. I'm sorry to say that. I would love for that not to be the case. But yeah, the stories are that they're the same kids I see every day. They just got caught and got caught up. That's kind of how I saw it. And the other thing I learned that's where I learned to make allies. Like, and I hate to say this, but like, some of the boys in there was like top kingpins on the street. So look, I know how to keep protected. Because if he said, don't mess with her, don't mess with her. So when it was my turn to kind of do what I needed to do, I wasn't worried about being hurt or nothing like that. Because the boys looked out for you. So best job ever. But I did leave that job to go into private practice for a whole different reason. It had nothing to do with the boys. It was a systems issue.
It's a system. The system will shock you and push you out of the system and to private spaces. I actually also worked at a boys' independent home. Could you imagine me? Y'all know I'm not the tallest person in the world. I won't give up my height, because that's still debatable. As long as I can afford heels, y'all will never know my true height. I was working third shift in an all-group boys independent home. In charge of everything from the meds to did you do your chores to you broke curfew. And so it was a natural gravity. It was it's interesting. But
I do believe it because they respect you if you respect them, and I just see you as that kind of person. Like there's no games here. If I say something, that's what I mean. So we respect each other. That's kind of I could definitely see that because they know there's no nonsense here. But so Ray, that's a long. It's a long story to your question that I wanted to leave and go into entrepreneur and private practice, and I was scared. I didn't know how to take that leap. And so when I started private practice, it was small, and then I needed a coach to help me take that leap. And then my practice started growing so fast. And I said to her, I can't see everybody. What should I do? And she said, have you ever thought about writing a book? This is where depression for Black women came up for me because I was starting to see that when they would come in, that's not the words they were using. So my clinical book that we use, that's not the words they would use. I would get, I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm tired of being sick and tired. I'm overwhelmed. I feel lost. I don't know who I am. So it was all these other kind of descriptions of their experiences that underneath that was the depression.
Wow.
That's kind of how I got around to leaving that system into the private practice and kind of fine tuning what depression looked like, learning the language of Black women,
Yes.
and also how they masked it behind the superwoman syndrome. So that's kind of how I started to write about that and get more that, and my story. Like, my narrative was that too. I wasn't that far from them. I was just coping. I was a high functioning person, where many of them also are. So we have people who are very high functioning depression, which means I'm good all day. You never know, but when I get home and close them blinds, that's a wrap. You know, I'm
so
exhausted.
Dr. Clack, though, I'm glad you said that, because I was just thinking, for me, even as a clinician, right? I know as a professor, I have to show up and I have to perform, but I think as a therapist, people like us, we're moving in and out of other people's emotions all the time. It's a wave. It's a performance, but we're sometimes reflecting out what the person is giving. So can you tell us a little bit more? You talked about Black women showing up as, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? Or, we see, grandmas and aunties kind of rubbing their knees and, rocking back and forth. And so how do you protect your head space? Because you're going to get tired. You're still a Black woman and you're still taking on other people's emotions, pains, and joys. So how do you recover when you start to feel low or sick and tired?
Yeah, that's I'm in and out of that space. I do better sometimes than others, honestly, because I know when I'm burning out, and it used to be I would travel 3-4 times a year, so I knew. My husband works pretty hard too, so we knew the time when it was getting a little too tight, tense in this house, and I needed a break, and so we would travel. We can't do that very much now, but when I got to that place where I could feel it happening, I remember so vividly about 3 years ago, I was doing so much, and I remember I came home in the middle to check on my daughter and her grandkids. And we also had dogs. I was just doing everything. I bent down to feed them, and I hit my head on the counter. And my daughter's like, "You all right?" And I was like, yeah. You know how we do. Yeah. We're fine. I'm fine. But I realized at that moment, I was so exhausted that I wouldn't even stop to take care of that for that moment. And it was 3 days later, I got sick. And so now I've learned to pay attention to my body. When I see and feel that kind of aches and pains and the mental kind of part where I'm checking out with my clients, where I'm not quite there, I'm like, it's time to pull back, and then I'll lighten my load for a couple of weeks, and then I'll pick back up. But it's an internal thing, like you're not present. I know when I'm not present, and I don't feel right having people pay me to do something that I know I do well, and I'm not well. So I will have to say to them, and the thing of it is that our clients think that they are the only one we see. That they are always on our mind. And when you cancel and you say, I need some time, it's like, okay, when are you coming back? I
have no comment for my clients that are watching this video. You're the only one. You're the only one.
Okay, I'm only speaking for myself, but they do believe that. They know you. They literally know you tell people because you make a living, but they love you and trust you so much that they don't want to see anybody. But they have to learn that if I'm telling you about self-care and I'm not practicing, I'm being very hypocritical. And I'm not going to be any good to you if I'm not good to myself. So
and that's true, Dr. Clack. Can we get real for one moment? Because Planet Venus is about keeping it real, because we bosses, right? But Dr. Clack, you and I both, because we're grown women and we've been Black for a long time, right? And something like that. But can it be said that we've looked at other clinicians, other coaches, other Black women, mentors that younger people work with, and we think she's not very healthy?
Yeah.
So
somebody pulled my coattails, so I know. So I know. Yes. Absolutely.
And it's hard with social media because we can't distinguish, everybody's doing the best that they can. But in social media, right, we're being saturated and bombarded with people who are selling themselves or putting themselves out there, not just selling themselves. So I think sometimes it's for altruistic reasons, as, you know, spiritual gurus or coaches or consultants, or, you know, we had a situation where someone was feigning being a clinician. Specifically in your area where it's hard to distinguish these letters, right? Because we're not educated on it. And so what would you say to younger women right now, especially with COVID? How do you even know who's healthy enough to lead you, coach you, model for you, and be your muse?
So you guys might heard a saying like, you need to see the receipts. In other words, who have they worked with? Can you see the fruits of their labor? Especially coaches, because most coaches get testimonials. They don't have to protect confidentiality, and they can't. It's not a dual responsibility like clinicians. We can't really say, "Hey, would you give a testimonial?" That's kind of like we're not supposed to do that. But coaches love that. They will have their coachees come out and say, "Hey, I made $100,000 in a month." You know, that's kind of how they brand their marketing. But it is you do need to check to see where people's licenses are. You need to see if they have a website. You need to see, are they licensed? There are so many people in the last 10 years that we've seen come out in the media who have been practicing clinicians and don't even have a degree because somebody didn't vet them. And they were working in major groups and institutions and facilities for years. I don't know how they did that with no one not knowing not noticing that they didn't have a skill set. But you do need to make sure people have licenses and get to know kind of like, well, where'd you go to school? And take the time out to interview the clinician that you're going to see, or the coach, just like you would if you were getting a home or a brand new car. You ask questions. You would
date around.
You know, I tell people, go into your fit.
Dr. Clack got receipts because I checked, guys.
I did too.
You know, hopefully Raven can share that information. You did too. Look at us. We're skeptical now. Instagram got us all skeptical. Okay. So hopefully, Dr. Clack, where can we find your information though? And we'll announce it again at the end.
For me, I am on mostly Facebook is where my community is. And I do some Instagram, and then I'm trying to get a little bit more involved in LinkedIn.
I saw your webpage though. I
just got my website redone in the last couple of months. So that's a work in progress too.
Yes. Okay, so we found receipts for Dr. Clack.
We did.
She's legitimate.
Yeah.
All right, so Dr. Clack, you were mentioning how when Black girls came in, they would talk about being tired or like the feeling of being overwhelmed. And I think that kind of talks to the fact that there's this taboo when it comes to talking about mental health within the Black community. So in your professional opinion, how do you think we should take steps to destigmatizing mental health, or even viewing it as important as like vaginal care or breast exams or like nail and hair care?
Good question, because we do want to treat mental health like we do physical health. Like we do definitely encourage people, if you have a headache, you go to a doctor. If you have a broken bone, you go and get it mended. You don't walk around with your bone sticking out your shoulder thinking, well, they're going to talk about me if I go get that fixed. We do want that to be treated the same. And I think it's about, you know, what I'm noticing is more celebrities come out and talk about their mental health. It seems like now it's this green light, so to speak. Like it's okay because as they begin to talk about their journey. But I wish that wouldn't have to be the case, that we have to wait for someone who's world known or famous or something, because everybody could benefit from mental health. You don't have to have a problem. You could just go to say, I want to maybe better in relationships or work on myself. We all could use that, especially now. So I think it's just opening up a dialogue and conversation like this. And I always love when people invite me to platforms that have nothing to do with mental health, but to talk about mental health. So it could be like a school board, it could be a church board or community event where mental health traditionally would not have been a conversation in that room. but people are starting to open up and allowing that to be a part of the conversation, because right now you really don't have many other outlets. So a lot of people are struggling right now. So we see that publicly. Now we see more public, right? So increased rates of suicide, especially for young Black kids. And we had historically not even thought that Black people would commit suicide, right? Death by suicide. But now we know the numbers for our little people are high. So we have to face the reality that, yes, there is Black mental health, and that includes people who will take their life.
Yeah, we're seeing more harming behavior. You know, when that wasn't a thing in our trainings. It was a thing, but it wasn't hardly talked about because it was the numbers were so small, right? And so related to that, because on Planet Venus, we've been trying to give a lot more attention to what's going on now, keeping in mind that we're in the middle of a triple pandemic, a health pandemic, racial pandemic, and an economic pandemic, right? In the midst of nobody's like really talking about Black girls and Black women specifically. I'm not going to say no one. I mean, we got projects like Say Her Name that's, you know, bringing a lot of media attention to the topics. But what would you say about grief, and how is grief looking right now in the midst of COVID-19 from your perspective as a Black woman, and how it's impacting the Black community overall?
Wow, that's a big one. Since March, so we know that COVID really probably started to be more known at least as early as January, February, but the country didn't really shut down till March. And so from March to, I would say, the last month, the number of women, particularly women of color, Black women, that I've seen who lost someone, a parent or a spouse even, like directly related, was large. Like I probably saw at least 10 people. That's 10 losses. I don't think I've seen 10 losses in a year in 2019. One of my clients lost her mom and dad 2 weeks apart. So that kind of grief is really, really heavy, because not only is the grief she's dealing with of not having her parents, now you can't have funeral services in the way that we used to. So she had a parent that was well known in his community, where 200, 300 people would have come. You have to, at that time, it was 10. That was the maximum. And she had 2 siblings. So how do her sibling families, like it was just, it's a lot. So the experience of grief is heavy, but the way that we mourn it looks different now. And so people are having a harder time about, well, how do I choose who comes? How do I protect people's health if I want them to be present, you know, to come to a memorial service, because of us needing to still practice physical distancing. So it complicates grief. So that's what I think the word I'm going to use. It's complicated grief, and it's complicated bereavement, because I don't know, other than the direct family members, who can even do the graveside now. So sometimes it stops short of that for some people. And so it just looks so different about how religion and how traditional spiritual services would have been able to be a part of that. That even looks different now.
And that's hard, because I'm the type of person that I hold it together, like from start to finish when you hear the news, right? And then you get to the family gatherings, and I like food. You know, I like good jokes. I like good drinks, and because I got the type of family we use a lot of humor. You know, and to get past, and storytelling. Clearly.
Oh yeah.
But and then when we get to the gravesite, because I like to be the drama queen, right? I like to step out of the black car. See, y'all already know where I'm going with this, because y'all know.
All right, is this a kingdom come moment where she's
I'm that person in the family, okay? And then I just like, you know, then I want to like push my way through the crowd so I can make sure I'm right there when the coffin is going down. And I like seeing like the white people that's in charge of like lowering it, like there's been some role reversal here. And then I'm like, oh, you know, that's my closure moment. But now you're telling me that part is taken away. You know, but then I like to wear the exaggerated heels, and so my heels go down.
So you can sink in the
Yeah, and then I have to have somebody tiptoe me out, you the grass.
Yes.
Because I
Yes.
want them to see my shoes are special. So you're telling me now.
Yeah. A lot of that's virtual.
COVID
So
has changed.
unless you go put your shoe up at the screen, it ain't happening.
On Zoom.
Who's gonna catch me? Who's gonna catch me? You know, and so so speaking of, so do Black people grieve differently? I mean, I know the rituals, but do we grieve differently? That's healing for us from a cultural perspective?
I think so, because we don't even often call the funerals. We call them homegoing celebration. So we actually are sending them off almost like, I mean, once we get through our crying and things like that. The funerals are about clapping and singing and, we're gathering around food and things like that. So I personally, I can honestly tell you, as long as I've been on this earth, I think I've been to maybe 3 people that are not people of color. So I've never even really seen it unless it's on TV what a white funeral looks like. I think Hispanic cultures and African cultures.
Even our funerals are segregated. Now I'm feeling really bad.
I'm thinking about that now. I don't think I have either.
I'm gonna have to think
of that many. But from what I can see, it's more like the Catholic churches sometimes. Like how our churches worship is almost a reflection of also how they celebrate or honor the deceased. So I do think it's different. Yeah. When I think about it. Yeah.
Probably not as melodramatic as.
Right.
Are there any unhealthy or healthy ways of grieving? Like, how would you categorize them?
Yes. So the one that I would say is biggest is when people numb themselves with alcohol and drugs. And so beyond just the social part where it continues, where they kind of shut the world out and they isolate themselves, and drinking or using some other kind of substance is how they're anesthetizing, so to speak, their pain. So that's unhealthy.
What about codependency? Is that unhealthy?
How would you see that? Maybe that helped me understand. Tell me what you're thinking.
Clinging to people because of loss, and so you're not really dealing with it. You're making other people deal with it for you. To always being there to comfort you.
That's a good one. I've never thought about it. That's a great way to look at that. I never thought about that, because it does happen, and that I'm turning to someone. Well, I think that also can be a little bit of exploitation, because if someone knows the grieving person is vulnerable, and that wouldn't normally be their way of connecting, I almost feel like you're kind of exploiting a vulnerable person. I have seen that too. But I know you're coming from the person who is the griever. So yeah, I guess that would fit like that. I hadn't thought about that, but that makes sense.
I've had situations for sure in my practice where people coupled up after the death of a loved one. Yes. Yeah, I can think of at least a couple of situations where they both knew the deceased and they partnered up 6 months to a year, and it didn't work out. And then they realized that it was really trauma bonding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was more trauma bonding. And so, which I think goes back, to your question, Raven. I think that what happens is that because we do have rituals of grieving that's really rooted in an African tradition and an African American tradition and a Southern tradition, right? That's like what Dr. Clack was saying about even sometimes our churches or religious affiliation. And I think that now it's grieving is becoming very voyeuristic in a way, right? And because of social media, we're seeing, homegoing services, traditional funerals, or, people are taking pictures of their, deceased loved ones and posting them on camera. And then you have people like me, like, did y'all see the shoes I'm wearing as I'm sinking in the dirt, right? I've never taken a picture. I remember recently I got offended. at a service in a cemetery, you know, when people wanted to video it. I did. I'll be honest with that. But, you know, that was the families, you know, that's what they called for. I was just there as support. But I know even in West Africa, I've seen it where when there's a homegoing service, there's really a parade. Yeah. The whole town sort of comes out, and you know, we just, out of respect, it's like in the States where we kind of pull off the road and we let the procession go past. In West Africa, we all kind of come out of our homes, we watch the parade, we celebrate with them, you know, we might dance until they go by. Usually the closer loved ones are kind of visibly grieving, right? And so, but I was thinking too, keeping in mind too, that we come from a people where people were, you know, white people, the colonizers and the enslavers wouldn't allow us these rights of passage. They wouldn't allow us these types of services. So we kind of grieve behind closed doors, you know, out of fear, you know, but also out of retribution. We can be killed or sold away for grieving, or it's happening back to back, right, Dr. Clack? So what happens when now we're seeing people getting killed, right? We didn't recover from Ahmaud Arbery before George Floyd. You know, we were still trying to figure out what was going on with Breonna Taylor and how she was killed, you know, and then all of the, you know, the sister that was organizing and she got raped and killed, you know, and so it's like it's coming in back to back. So how do we effectively grieve when we're taking hits all the time back to
man? I was thinking about that, because when I was thinking about the idea of collective trauma, like this is like as a people of color, as Black people, when we're watching continuously people who look like us be violently and murdered and taken away from us before we get to heal, on top of losses of people we admire. So I was just thinking about that when I was talking to some men about mental health, and I said, before COVID or around that time, men were grieving, and many women too, but more men were grieving Kobe. And how many of them, Kobe was like a peer for them. And then there were subsequent losses, and it kept coming and kept coming. And it was like, you didn't have time to grieve one before the next one came. And then the next one came. And then they start to accumulate. So it's like, it's distinct to me, cumulative trauma. It's just like one on top of the other. And if in between there, you don't get some kind of support, then that's where I think you have what would be a silent, so to speak, nonviolent protest versus we're sick and tired of this. So now we are up in the ante, and now we have to show you what we mean. So now you see the looting, and people are like, well, why do they have to do? I'm like, well, see, because they tried to do it the nice way, your way, and yet now somebody's knee is on somebody's neck. So now it's like, again. So now we need to show you, because now it may be our community, but now we're going to burn buildings down, because we also don't know what else to do with our pain. So that's where I think the collective trauma comes in. And as a group, I think we got to go back to grassroots. I don't know any other way to do this, but to get back into these communities, back into the churches, back into homes, and talk about the kind of way Martin Luther King used to get around in terms of speaking and galvanizing these grassroots groups, because I realized we have migrated so much. We're all over the place.
Yes. So I call that we're chasing the American dream, the white American middle class dream. And
I agree.
It's at the expense of African culture, Black culture, in a way that was not just sustaining for us, but was a positive way of coping. It's what contributed to our resilience, but we're modeling other people's ways of life, and it's taking us apart. So if I'm hurting, I can't go next door and go talk to Anaya and tell her about my pain. Right? If I'm hurting, you know, from a loss, I can't just go down the street to the local church, Black church, and say, hey, can I have some assistance, some help? Where can I find resources? Because we're all spread out. And it's, of course, an economic cost to that too, right? Being spread out.
I think that also has to do with like the like because of COVID, there's this disappearance of hush harbor spaces. And so now these spaces that we're creating are being surveillanced more because they have to be online. And so that I feel like that is also triggering generationally because we have been surveilled when we talk about these things. And so we've had to do those things in person, which is also common in like indigenous trauma studies as well.
That's good.
I'm interested now in this indigenous trauma.
I'll send you a link. I'm gonna send you a link. I
We'll put that in the link too, right?
Yes.
We're gonna put that in the link. We're still a growing community, Dr. Clack.
Oh, that's awesome though. That's great.
Yes. Did you want to ask a question next, Raven?
Oh no.
Okay, so should I shoot? I think you already hinted at this, but what would you say are healthy ways of grieving?
Okay, definitely reaching out. Support systems. So we're talking on the heels of what we just talked about, how we're spread out now as communities. So our siblings now are in other states or other parts of the world, and our family members are not close like they used to be. Churches are shut down. We're not, so, but support systems creatively now with COVID, virtual is the best thing we got right now. Because I mean, I've seen people do parking lot things, like we pull our cars up or 6 feet apart, things like you can be really creative, but virtual is the safest way that we've so far. But a support system is the healthiest way because people don't want to be isolated at this time. They say they do, and maybe they need some space, but ultimately at some point they need to reconnect. That's part of healthy grieving, is to begin to reconnect with the people that may have disconnected with to deal with my grief. So that's healthy. And then kind of creating a new normal. If you're the widower or if you're the child of the person, it's how do I move through life without them now and start to reconnect to life, and so to speak. And then physical healthy coping mechanisms are back to what I was eating. A lot of people kind of stop eating during grieving, so you have to get back to eating, exercising, work, all those kind of things we had probably slowed down. It's like, how do I kind of slowly reintegrate those things into my life?
Those are really good points, because I was just thinking that everything that you said about positive ways of grieving or what healthy grieving looks like, I think too, as a people, we have to remember that we don't just grieve when someone has a corporal death or actually physically dies, right? We're also grieving when we see Jacob Blake getting shot in the back 7 times. We grieve for the children that were watching him get shot, and we're grieving for the women who were in the background of this story, who we still don't know how, the police were called or their relationship to Jacob and the children. We grieve every time Breonna Taylor flashes past our screens, and we know that there's been no response to our calls for justice, right? We grieve that we have inoperative school systems. We grieve that our kids, our college students, can't play and go through their own independence phase, so I think we're grieving economic loss, right? We're grieving, I have a college student, we're grieving, that they may not have the same choices that we had, during and after college, right? And so we're grieving a violent, a person who's trying to, not lead the country in a positive way. So we're grieving our ideals about democracy and what freedom looks like.
Absolutely.
And so I think all of that could apply when we think about different types of grieving, spiritual loss, physical loss, as well as, loss of one's civil liberties.
Absolutely.
So knowing the different types of grieving that Black people are going through at this particular moment, how can we teach healthy grieving? How can we teach our Black girls in particular how to grieve?
Wow. So when I think about our Black girls, because I work with them too. So when I was I've done group homes and all that stuff, I always gravitated to young women and men in underserved, kind of disenfranchised, all those kind of places. And one of the things I find that they are lacking is connection, not just connection with others, but with themselves. And
Oh.
and when they learn to know and love who they are, they can practice healthy grieving. But when you don't even know emotional vocabulary, when you don't know what you feel, but you know you feel something in your body, but no one's told you what that is, and so you turn to that dude, you turn to other people who may be misguiding me because I don't even know my body. It's hard to place grief in there when they're still trying to figure out themselves. So to me, it's a holistic thing for young ladies. It's part of everything else we want them to do in terms of self-care. That's the best way. I feel like there's so much, when you've been moved around a lot, you keep losing little parts of yourself because you lose your things. Every time you move, I remember I hated when they wouldn't buy kids suitcases. They just kept coming with these green trash bags. And the bags over time, because they just were moved quickly, they started to lose things from the bags. And for me, that's just a metaphor of them losing little parts of themselves everywhere they go.
Wow. Tiffany Haddish talks about that, the comedian. You know, she was in and out of foster care. And she talked about, and she's very, you know, specific, because she says she still experiences mental health issues around it. But she said once in an Instagram post, she was like, do you know, I still look at garbage bags differently, because she used to carry a black garbage bag every time it was time to leave a new home. And what if something didn't fit? Or what if she had to leave a house in an emergency? All of that just stayed there. But she said sometimes too, she's always ready to go with this little bitty garbage, but whatever the garbage bag, she can fit her whole life into a garbage bag.
That's right. So you know what? They don't expect much. They don't want much more than what they can carry. Again, emotionally, what am I carrying with me, right? So when it comes down to grieving, is first helping them to even learn how to be attuned to self. What does that look like? And then you can bring in grieving, because emotionally, grief is a heavy one. But it usually, so we talk a lot about relational aggression for girls, that their grief and sadness would come out in their aggression with other females. So I remember always hearing them say, I don't get along with females. I got all guy friends. I don't like, you know, because I think that's also a part of not having bonded with healthy women. And so they turn away from that, and they trust guys. Because guys are just kind of, they just show up as who they are. They ain't allowed to hold on.
We got to have you back for that conversation.
External. They're externalizers, so to speak. So but there's a protection too. Like there's something about them that they're protective. So the girls are often at each other because they need the same things, but they don't have it. So
that makes sense. Wow. Yes,
that does make sense.
That's a lot, because that's the one that gets under a lot of our skins when we hear other girls or women say, I just don't get along with females. Right? I'm like, if you ever heard pimp language, that's females. That's what pimps say on the street corner. Or white scientists comparing us to horses, right? That's how it's just like, oh yeah. So I know that we're out of time now, so I'm gonna go ahead and let us wrap up. And I want to thank you, Dr. Clack, once again. And we'll have definitely your bio in the link, and the link to your bio, I should say, for our guests. And I'll let Raven close up for us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clack. For everyone that's watching, go to planetvenusinstitute.com. Our Instagram name is Planet Venus Institute. You can also go to Twitter, which is Planet Venus at Planet Venus 365.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to stop.